Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's What It Takes to Be a Successful Entrepreneur event. This is very exciting because not only is it the first What It Takes event of the What It Takes series, it's also the first event that we're holding live in person in over 2 years, so let's talk about it. So it's a pleasure to be presenting the presenter tonight, and so I thought it might be worth introducing myself a little bit. My name is Alex Jones, and I work for Westminster Enterprise Network. For those of you who don't know what We Network are, we're the department of the university that helps promote students to start their own business or start a freelancing career. Entrepreneurship and freelancing has always been something that excites me. Ever since probably I was in year 8, and my first introduction into entrepreneurship was selling sweets on the school bus. And that was my first kind of starting my own business, and I absolutely loved it. And I think essentially it was me recognizing a gap in the market. And the gap in the market was that kids have money in their pocket, and they have an hour and a half on a school bus and nowhere to spend their money. So I'm going to walk up and down two school bags, one with my books and pencil case and whatnot, and one full of chocolates and fizzy drinks, and I was just, dealing on the school bus, and it was wicked. It was my own business, and I loved it. So from then on, I just kind of, loved being in the world of entrepreneurship. And then when I was at uni, I kind of started a second business, well, as if selling sweets is really a business, but I started a business called Wavy Bagels, which was selling rainbow bagels at music festivals. And it was really cool, and I branded it in a really cool way. But however, unfortunately, in 2020, due to the pandemic, I had to stop doing this. So that was a shame. And then now, alongside working here at Westminster Enterprise Network, I have a side hustle called AJ Socials, which is a freelance social media marketing agency where I have a couple of clients and I just give them an online presence and just kind of give them a social media. So before I present our speaker for today, I am just going to go over some housekeeping rules. So firstly to note that this talk is being recorded. It will be edited and made available on YouTube when it's ready, and we'll send you a link via email. There will also be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the talk, and there will be members of the team in the hall with roaming mics, so just free to put your hand up and they'll come over to you so you can ask your questions. Graham has also set up a Slido page with a Q&A section as part of his presentation, so feel free to put questions in there too, and I can put them to Graham at the end. Cool, so that's out of the way. I'm just going to present our speaker. Graham started his career in the finance sector, working for the London Stock Exchange, Baring Securities, Union Bank of Switzerland, and Merrill Lynch. In 1999, he bought a digital camera and discovered there was nowhere to get high-quality photographic prints. He wrote a business plan on the tube each morning to solve this problem, and he got some of his colleagues to invest, as well as his friend to join him as a co-host. Together they started Photobox, initially having to run it as a small business. Over time, they raised more money, merged and acquired other businesses, expanded into Europe, and eventually sold to a private equity firm in 2016. Graham now advises on entrepreneurship and pro bono courses. During this talk, Graham will summarise his early career after graduating from Westminster and how this led to him start his entrepreneurial journey. He'll explain how a small startup called Photobox eventually owned Moonpig, and he'll discuss the business and personal highs and lows along the way. So please everybody put your hands together to welcome Graham Hobson.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay? All right, good. So I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes, and as Alex said, I'm going to talk you through my journey and the highs and the lows. We'll have some questions, and I'm going to show you a Slido link. So I don't know if you want to scan this now. Being a cheapskate, I've got a free plan with Slido, so it only allows 100 people to participate. But if you go to this link, you can either go to slido.com and put in UOW, or scan the QR code. If you go to that link, there's two things you can do. There's a Q&A section where you can ask me questions anytime while I'm talking, and then we'll go through them at the end. And there's also a short poll, which I'd love if some of you participate in, and it's asking you what your likely career path is over the next 5 years, and we're going to look at that in a couple of minutes. So if you do get a chance to just click on that one poll, I'll review the results shortly. So, first of all, can someone tell me what the word entrepreneur means? Person who finds gaps in the market, yeah? Anything else?
Someone who takes risks.
Someone who takes risks, yeah? Startup, someone who runs a startup. Yeah, all of these are what we understand entrepreneur to be. Who speaks French in the room? Okay, young man at the back there. So what does the word literally mean, like entre? What does that mean? Okay, what's another meaning of entre? Yeah, it could be between, yeah. And preneur? Based on the verb prendre? To take, yeah. And preneur is someone who takes, right? So, I know I'm being incredibly literal here, but the word can mean someone who takes and between. And I think this is a really important definition, because for me, entrepreneurship is about making connections. It's about spotting an opportunity, meeting somebody at a party, and then 2 years later thinking that's the perfect person to help me set up that company or solve that problem. Or seeing two different products and thinking they would be amazing if they were combined together. Or, yeah, just right time and right place, making those connections between things. And I think people who want to be entrepreneurs have to be open to those random connections and making those connections. So, as you heard, I came here. I was here in 1986, that's when I graduated. I was at the New Cavendish Street campus for computer science. 86 is a long time ago, none of you were born then. It's the year that Stranger Things was set, if that helps you figure out the era. And also computer science was kind of half theoretical then. Not everybody had access to computers. At the time, we all take the internet for granted now, but computer communications were really just starting to emerge that year. In fact, I think I bought a kit from Maplin and built my own modem, which was 300 bits per second. So pretty slow. It's about typing speed. My connection at home now, I think, is 1.2 gigabits per second, so considerably faster. But yeah, 86 was a fun time to be here at the University of Westminster. I don't know about you guys, but we only had 2 lectures on a Wednesday, and they were really boring, so I used to skip and go to Leicester Square instead and see a movie. And those 2 lectures I used to skip were database theory and statistics, which I thought were dreadfully boring. And then when I started my career, those were probably the 2 things I had to end up using the most. So I graduated, I got 2 job offers from the milk round. One was to work for the London Stock Exchange in technology, and the other one was to work for a small computer reseller in High Wycombe. And I can't remember why, but somehow I favoured the High Wycombe job, and my dad said, "Are you crazy? Take the LSE job," and that's what I did. So I ended up working at London Stock Exchange for 2 years. It was an amazing time in financial markets. There was this thing called Big Bang going on where financial markets were being liberalised and technology was flooding in, and I got a chance to learn a lot about professionalism and how to use my skills. I have to also say, the 80s was a very great time for social mobility in the UK. My university education, unlike yours, was completely free. I didn't have to pay tuition. In fact, for the first 2 years, they paid me to come to uni, paid my expenses, and that was a great thing because I had a nice middle-class upbringing, but my parents were kind of distracted, and I'm not sure whether they would have paid for a university education. And by having access to free university education, it kind of transformed me from a very poor academic student and very unfocused to somebody who had a degree and ended up getting a good career path. So, worked at the London Stock Exchange, and then I went on to work for 3 different investment banks over the next 10 years, always in technology, but getting exposure to trading markets, equities, derivatives, and learning my skills. So, let's have a look at the Slido poll. Where is it? So, it's not jazz I want you to look at, it's a different... Okay. So, what you guys have said, still changing a little bit, is the number one choice is that 38% of you in the room want to ideally start your own entrepreneurial business, run it and scale it in the next 5 years. And that's admirable, and I'm going to see whether I can put you off in the next 20 minutes. The next choice after that is work for someone else, earn and learn. So I had this technology career, and I'd been working for banks, and to be honest, it was great. I got paid really well. I had really interesting work. Investment banking was like the Wild West in the 1990s. It was good fun. We felt like we were playing with technology and defining new ways of working. But I got to the point where I was 35, and I was married, and I had 2 small boys at the time. They were 3 years old and 1 year old. I've got 3 grown-up men now for sons, but at the time, two young kids. And my wife and I used to take lots of photos, and I'd go down to Boots every couple of weeks with a roll of film and get it developed. And I remember having this bookshelf at home that was just kind of filling up with these packs of photos. And I reflected on the fact that we weren't being very selective. You know, every roll of 36 pictures, some of them, well, most of them were crap, some of them were good. Film cameras were a weird thing, right? You take the picture and you hope it's going to come out well, but in some cases the flash didn't go off or it was out of focus, and I just wanted to be more selective. And, you know, I'm a tech guy, right? I wanted to play around with a gadget, and so I bought a digital camera, a Sony camera, and it produced beautiful, sharp, colourful pictures, and I put them on my computer screen, and they made great screensavers, and I could look at the pictures. But my wife said, yeah, cool, but how do I get prints? How do I put them on the wall? How do I give a copy to my mother and all this stuff? And it kind of feels strange now, but there was no way to get prints. You couldn't get them online, you couldn't get them on the high street. Any of you ever owned an inkjet printer? Yeah, a few of you. Okay, so these were things that took forever to print one thing. Whenever you went to use them, the inks had dried up. It was on crap paper, so not real photos. So that wasn't an option. And I thought, it can't be that difficult, right? It's basically one of those big fat print machines you see in the back of Boots. It's a website and some kind of order management thing in the middle. How difficult can it be? And there was lots of other stuff going on. I guess I was at 35 at that kind of reflection point. Is this the job I want to be doing for the next 20 years? Do I want to try something different? Do I want to take some risk? And I reflected on those things and thought, maybe I'll try and start this company. So on that point, I think most of you in the room, about 40% of you, said you want to start your own entrepreneurial business in the next 5 years. And one of the things I learned is you've got to feel well equipped to do that. You've got to have the right foundations. And at age 35, which I'm sure feels very old to most of you in the room, I'd already had 14 years working in industry. I'd built up some savings, some confidence, some connections, colleagues, and I felt quite well equipped to jump off and do something else. And I think, hopefully during my story you'll hear that starting your own business is risky and taxes your mental health, and you don't get much sleep, and all of these things, and definitely drains your savings. And you have to make sure you give yourself the best possible chance. So I think whenever you're about to do this type of leap, make sure you feel well equipped, ready, you've got some domain knowledge about what you're about to jump into. So there's this point where you should evaluate, are you ready? And at age 35, I did feel ready, but I didn't quite know what I was getting into. So, to be honest, all I wanted was the print service. If Fuji or Kodak or Agfa had launched an online photo printing service, I would have been quite happy to go and use that and give up this weird idea. But it wasn't happening, and I used to sit on the tube every morning going into my job, which at the time was, in the Moorgate area, and I had my laptop, and I used to sit on the tube, and I'd start to write a business plan. And it was, I don't know if it says there, I think it was about 16 pages long. And for me, I'd never written a business plan before, but it was really simple. I wanted to create a print service, and I was just breaking it down into different parts. How would I attract customers? What type of technology was involved? How was I going to get the funding for it? How much money would I need to create such a company? It was basically a whole bunch of questions that I was asking myself, and I was trying to answer them in this document. So I wrote this business plan, and I started to talk to people at work, and I was, at the time, working for Merrill Lynch. And some of my colleagues were very wealthy traders, and this was 1999. Which was an absolute bubble in the internet online space. Everybody seemed to be starting a website. Amazon had been running for a couple of years. There was this mad gold rush to get businesses online, and everyone said, oh, I'm doing a website, I'm doing an online service. So when I spoke to people and said, I've got this idea for a photographic print service online, they were like, how much money do you want? That was their first question, how much money? And I was oh my God. So I thought about it, I wrote this business plan, shared it with some people, and then thought, okay, I'm going to go ahead. And I said to people, okay, I'm going to raise £480,000. I don't know how I came up with that, well, I do know how I came up with that number, but I'll come to that in a minute. But in the space of 1 week, I had people who'd given me £480,000. On average, they gave me about 15,000 each. Some gave me 30, one person gave me 45,000. I felt like a complete fraud. I opened an NatWest bank account and paid in close to £500,000. And I had 16 sheets of paper, and that was it. And yeah, suddenly it hit me that I've got to do this. So I'm going to ask you for another definition. What do you understand the word serendipity to mean? Anyone? Yes?
A lot of luck coming together at the same time.
Yes, a lot of luck coming together at the same time. So good fortune, good luck, things happening that are a coincidence. And I started to feel like there was an enormous amount of serendipity going on at the beginning of the Photobox journey for me. And, well, to give you an example, oh, sorry, didn't work. Do you know what? My emoji aren't working, so that fills me with terror because that means some of the slides aren't going to show anything. There's an emoji on here of a toothbrush, so just imagine you're looking at a toothbrush. One example of serendipity was that I wrote this business plan and I felt pretty confident about the money, the technology, and what service we would offer. I had absolutely no idea about marketing. I'm still to this day terrified of marketing, don't know how it works, don't have a good instinct for it. But I knew I had to find customers somehow for this service. And whenever I used to go to my dentist in my 20s, have a checkup, whatever, he would say to me, oh, you work in technology. My cousin runs PC World. And every time, this mantra, oh, you work in tech. My cousin runs PC World. So I thought, how would I reach people who bought digital cameras? What if I could put a voucher in the box of everyone who bought a camera at PC World? So I phoned my dentist, and I said, can I have your cousin's phone number? He gave it to me, and I spoke to this guy, Colin, and it turned out Colin didn't work at PC World anymore. He'd gone on to another company. But he came in and he met me, and he told me he used to be a senior director of Dixon Stores Group. He'd run PC World. He used to run Boots Photographic in the UK. He knew everybody in the photographic industry at Kodak and Fuji and Agfa. He brought the first mini labs into the UK in the early 1970s. And I explained to him what I was doing, and he said, this sounds amazing. I'd love to be your chairman. And that random connection of my dentist telling me that his cousin ran PC World led to me finding an amazing chairman who really helped us get the company going. Similarly, my first finance officer, CFO, he was my wife's cousin's boyfriend. And I thought he was an accountant for pubs, and it turned out that he was a financier who helped US and British companies raise money and float on the NASDAQ stock exchange. So these kind of connections came together. Similarly, my co-founder, Mark, I convinced a friend, after 4 attempts of him saying no, I convinced a friend, Mark, to come in and join me. And Mark brought very different things to the table than I had, different skills. So all of these things, these serendipitous things, were one way that we got the company going, and actually they continue to happen all along. And I think it's a manifestation of us as entrepreneurs making connections between things and remembering that random fact from 2 years ago. So embrace serendipity. It's very important in entrepreneurship. So yeah, when you have £500,000 in the bank, it doesn't mean your life is glamorous. This was our first office in Warner Street in Clerkenwell. We put a laminated sticker on the door to say who we were. We inherited a bunch of crappy shelves from I think they were a photocopying leasing company or something. So we made some desks out of doors or something like that, and we had a little server rack. There was no such thing as AWS then, so we had to host our own photos. That unit with lights on there was our first storage array, 64 gigs of storage, cost us 10 grand, took 2 people to lift. Obviously, all of your phones have more storage than that now. But yeah, this was our first office, and we were in that space for 3 years. So, in the early days, there are lots of things a startup doesn't have. And our particular problem was we had no way of marketing, no way of reaching customers. These days, I'm pretty sure if any of you start a business or work for an early stage business, it will attract customers by using Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Google AdWords. None of that stuff existed. Google did not exist when we started Photobox in year 2000. There was no infrastructure that we could use. We couldn't use cloud services, we couldn't use AWS, Google Cloud, so we had to build everything ourselves, our own websites, our own tech completely. And that meant we burnt through 2/3 of that 500,000, 480,000 incredibly quickly, within a few months. So we had to buy the printer as well, because the other thing is, when you do a startup, no banks will ever loan you money. So we couldn't get a loan to lease the equipment. We had to pay cash for it. So yeah, very lean days. But this issue about marketing was really bugging me, and we tried doing leaflet drops and leaving them in tube stations. We sponsored one of my dad's suburban golfing events. None of that stuff seemed to work. I got interviewed on LBC one night about what I was doing, and I was convinced that our servers would melt down with all the thousands of people registering after hearing me on the radio. I think we got 12 registrations, so it just wasn't working. And we just realized that in order to win customers, we'd have to figure out what they wanted and deliver it. And when I launched Photobox, which was May 2000, we only offered like 3 print sizes. 6x4 inch prints, 5x7s, 8x10s. That was it, 3 print sizes, nothing else. Well, we said, we're going to make the most amazing print service. And we made 3 promises to our customers. We said, if you order by 4 p.m., you're going to get your order tomorrow morning on your doormat. It's going to be amazing quality. You won't believe how much better than 35mm it is. And if you're unhappy for any reason, we'll just give you your money back. And so we wanted to create a service where our customers felt valued and loved, and they got a great service, and they would tell their friends that this is the way to get prints these days. And to be honest, it was very, very slow going, but that did work. We did build up steadily revenue over time, although it was a long, slow journey. I think it took me more than 18 months to get to my first £1,000 a day, so quite slow growth. The other thing was the timing of our launch. So this is the NASDAQ exchange index, and you can guess the day we launched, which was that one there. And whilst it's great to launch into a bubble because everybody gets so enthusiastic about your company, what we found was that 2 weeks after going live, no investor wanted to touch us. They thought that the internet was dead, consumer internet businesses were not going to work, and at this point, we'd burned through probably 90% of our money. We had to pay a couple of developers to build the website, to build the internal systems. We were paying some small salaries. But yeah, most of the money had gone, and we'd always planned to raise more money as soon as we went live. And we had a plan for somebody to invest £1 million for 20% of the company, and it was a Middle Eastern investor, and it just went away. They weren't going to invest anymore. So we had a real problem that we were about to run out of money. I think we worked out we had about 5 weeks left to live. But in the end, we convinced our existing investors to put a little bit more money in, about 100,000. And Mark and I said, this is it. We're just going to run this as a small business, the two of us. We're not going to have any employees for a while. And that's what it was, a small business. And yeah, like I said, we kind of went into hibernation mode. And the net effect of this was that we ran a small business for way too long. And I realized that I should have changed my plan a couple of years later and said, okay, we're live now, we're growing, we've got good revenues, we've proven we can do this. Now is the time to go faster, raise money, go and talk to venture capital companies. But we didn't, and that was my bad. We stayed in small business mode way too long. Everybody was getting a bit frustrated, and I had somehow in my head that VCs were evil. They were people who would take control of your business and dominate things. I later learned that they're really nice people who help you grow your business, but at the time I was reluctant. So one of the personal effects of this for me were that when I worked in banking, I used to love to get a coffee every morning after lunchtime, and you know, a coffee, a posh coffee these days costs what? £2.50, £2.80, £3, something like that. I think even then it cost about £2. And that £2 or £4 a day just couldn't do it. And if I took my kids to the park at the weekend, and they said, can we go and get a hot chocolate? No, that would be like 15 quid to do that. So the thing that symbolizes that period of austerity for me for 5 years and more was no coffees, none of the treats. I sold my car, I remortgaged my house, we stopped going on foreign holidays. So it was a really lean time. And my wife was incredibly supportive, but she also said, what's your plan? You know, are we going to do this forever? And I think around 2005, I started to feel like we had to shift up a gear. So I said to Mark, my co-founder, this is the time when we have to grow the business and raise money, or stop doing this and go back to our banking careers. And the plan we came up with was we'd already at this point become UK market leader, which sounds amazing, but we were still a small business. But we said, okay, if we can be the main print service in the UK, let's try and expand into Europe. But we don't have any European credentials, so let's go and try and find a small European company we can buy with somebody else's money and then expand into Europe. So that was our plan. We were going to do a small AIM listing, it's like a small stock market listing, and raise money from that and then go buy a European company. And we started to do that. We found a tiny little Swiss company that had only 7 employees, but they were running in about 8 countries. And they looked perfect. We negotiated a deal with them and flew over to do what's called due diligence, where you start to kick the tires, check everything is as you expect it to be, they're telling the truth. And I discovered on that first day what seemed to be a big problem, which was if I looked at all their orders, they never charged any VAT. And I asked them about that at dinner that night. I said, how come you don't charge VAT? And they said, well, we're Swiss. I'm like, but you've got customers in Germany, right? And they said, yes. And I said, and where do you print for those customers? They said, in Germany. And I said, so how come you're not charging German VAT? And they said, oh, it's fine, we're Swiss. Anyway, it turned out they weren't fine. They owed as much money in VAT as we were willing to pay for the whole company. So the deal fell apart, and we phoned up our nearest rivals in France, two guys that had started a very similar company to Photobox. And we didn't trust these guys at all. We'd met them many times, but we'd never let them see our lab, they'd never let us see theirs. It was like ice cream wars, you know, kind of petty, but we didn't trust each other. But anyway, we phoned them and said, we've raised some money, we're about to raise some money, we'd like to move into Europe, how about putting the two companies together? And to cut a long story short, they said, okay, but they wanted to raise the money from US VCs. So we merged, and the company was called Photoways. They were based in Paris. We put the two companies together. We were probably turning over, I don't know, £3 million on the UK side, 3 million euros on the French side, and we suddenly had this bigger company. And I remember that I went over on Eurostar, and the investors said, look, we're not sure that the French founders are going to stay. They might move on. Will you run the company? And I said, I felt out of my depth 6 months ago. Now you want me to run a European company as well, or possibly move to Paris? So I said, I don't feel ready to do this. And my colleague Mark, he didn't want to do it either. So we said, help us find a new CEO. So we found this guy, Stan. Stan had come from AOL. It's a bit weird. I had to fire myself as CEO and hire a new one. And I decided to take responsibility for the technology in the company, so to become the CTO. And Stan instantly became the hardest boss I've ever had in my life. I hired him, and if ever I'd see his number come up on my phone on a Sunday evening, my heart would sink. It always meant something bad was going on, and he was going to, you know, ball me out for it. But it was, you know, it really worked to have somebody experienced who knew what they were doing. So you can see a couple of pictures from the period shortly after that. We started to invest in technology people. That's our first hackathon. We were really starting to industrialize our production. That's one of our French factories. We had one in London as well. That one specialized in producing photobooks. At that point, we'd invented the photobook in Europe, and we had giant machines that printed the internal pages and the covers, and they all get bound together. And then when people order different products, they get put in pigeonholes to match up. So you can see the kind of industrialization kicking in. But I feel like I've worked for about 4 different companies along the way, and each stage presented new challenges. And in 2007, this is about a year after we merged the two companies together, I said, oh, I'm doing tech now, so I can make big promises about tech and it'll all magically happen. And one of the things I naively promised was, I said, we've got like 6 websites across Europe. I'm going to build one super website that does everything in all languages. So we're going to have this, you know, Web 2.0, amazing drag and drop, social media enabled website, and I'll build it for you. I told the board, you know, give me, I can't remember, like 10 people and 9 months, and I'll build this amazing website. 18 months into that project, I had the most awful burnout. I remember being on holiday with my family in Sweden for a week, and the project was going horribly wrong, and I just spent the entire week on email trying to firefight stuff. Didn't enjoy family holidays at all. My wife will tell you that's completely normal. If we were up a mountain or on a boat, my phone would go off and there'd be some code red going on that the website had crashed or something. But I was really getting worried about this project. And I came back to the UK. I remember going on some client visit. We were going to meet a partner, and I was starting to feel like I was having a panic attack or something in the car. I felt like, I don't know, couldn't breathe properly. We had the meeting, somehow I got through it, came back to London, and I thought, I'm having a heart attack. I have to go into hospital. So I went to A&E, and they checked me out, and they said, no, your heart's fine. You know, is there something else going on in your life? And it turned out it was just like a panic attack. But for months, I felt like I can't cope with this. And there were a lot of things that I ended up reflecting on, that I wasn't sleeping well, I wasn't having a good diet, I definitely wasn't exercising. And I went to my boss, I went to the new CEO, and I said, fire me, I'm not able to do this, I don't know how to deliver this project, and I'm out of my depth. And he wouldn't take my resignation. He told me to take a week off, and then come back to work with fresh eyes and evaluate the project. And he said, whatever it takes, you tell me what you need. You need more people, you need more time, you need to change the spec. Just figure it out and come back to me with a plan. And that's what I did. And I kind of took it step by step. And we got that project back on track. It did take 2 years to finish that project. And even then, that new website was dog slow for the next 6 months. But we got there eventually. And I kind of learned the power of, you know, stepping back, looking with fresh eyes, and reevaluating what needs to be done. Oh, kind of emoji. So the next few years, when we went live with that website, it was 2008. And even though that website nearly destroyed me, it was an amazing engine of growth. We suddenly had this full-service website that we could operate anywhere in Europe. We could create new countries as quickly as the people could translate the content. We could launch in any currency, and it was amazingly flexible. We could give marketing teams control over the content and the products they offered and the prices they charged. And that powered the company through a very rapid period of growth and enabled us to expand into 19 countries, for example. Whenever you take somebody else's money, and we'd taken some angel investment in 2000, and then we took some VC money in 2006. Whenever you take somebody else's money, they want to get their money back, plus a lot more. And there is this pressure to give them what they want. And at the beginning, I had 25 angel investors, and probably 15 of them were sophisticated city people who hoped for the best but didn't care if it all went horribly wrong. They were willing to take the risk. And the other 10 were like mates of my dad who phoned me every month asking me when they were going to get their money back and actually threatening me if, after 2 years because it was taking too long. So I felt this pressure. But we'd taken professional VC money in 2006. And when it came to 2010, they were starting to get itchy feet. They were saying, what's your exit plan? Are you going to sell the company? Are you going to raise more money? We'd like to start to think about when we can cash out as VCs. And we started talking to competitors in the industry, and there was a very large US company that was interested in us, and we negotiated with them, and they said, right, we're going to buy your company, and this is the amount of money we're going to pay, and we were like, that's an amazing amount of money, thanks, that's great. We went through all the planning, due diligence, they started to draw up personal contracts for us all, but the deal fell apart. We got vibes it was not going to happen, and it didn't. And we reflected in late 2010, why didn't we sell the company? Why weren't we attractive enough for them to go ahead with the deal? What enabled them to get distracted? And for various reasons, Moonpig was the answer. We had a business that was turning over tens of millions of pounds, but not big enough to float to do an IPO. We had a business that was profitable, but made all of that profit in just 3 weeks of the year, just before Christmas. And if we got that period wrong, we made no profit for the year, and investors saw that as very risky. And we had a business that was mostly focused on UK and France, and whilst we were present in other countries, we didn't really have a very diversified customer base. And for various reasons, Moonpig was the answer. They had 4 peaks a year instead of 1. They doubled our turnover, doubled our profit, and they gave us access to a completely different set of customers. And we just thought, if we put these 2 companies together, we're going to be a much more interesting group. So I'd known Nick Jenkins for years. Some of you may have seen him on Dragon's Den. We started at roughly the same time. We used to print stuff for them at Moonpig. He used to print cards for us. And we even joked about not joked, but we talked about putting the 2 companies together in about 2006. And I think he went to the pub for a beer with my CFO, James, and he said, yeah, I'll sell it to you for 2 million quid. And I said, piss off, I'm not going to pay 2 million quid for Moonpig. But in 2011, we bought it for 120 million pounds. So my bad. But to be fair, during that period of 2006 to 2011, Moonpig had become a giant. And the jingle that you all know today, that TV campaign started around 2006, 2007. And they'd done an amazing job growing the company. And yeah, adding it in was expensive, but very, very much worth it. And we never regretted that decision at all. We also went on a buying spree across Europe. We bought a big company in Germany called Poster XXL, which gave us a German factory, access to the German market. We tried for about 3 years to break into Germany, and we couldn't get to what we called a podium position. We couldn't get to first, second, or third in the market. And our general advice is, if you're trying to compete in the market, you can't get to first, second, or third, you give up. But we ended up buying them, and then we went to first in the German market. We bought Albelli in Netherlands, although that was after I left, Hoffman in Spain, and Greece in Belgium. Actually, sorry, in Netherlands as well. So, yeah, M&A, mergers and acquisitions, was a big part of what we did, and it makes sense when you complement each other, you fill each other's gaps. So back in 2006, when we merged with a French company, Photobox, we were really good at tech, and we were good at customer service and kind of the core mission. They were much better at marketing and industrializing the factory. And so when we put the 2 companies together, we filled each other's gaps, and it made perfect sense. And it was the case with all of these that we felt that they filled gaps in our proposition. So, slightly weird graphics. So we continued to grow, and I guess there were 3 things, or a couple of things that were going on with reaching that level of scale. I can't believe it myself actually, but we somehow got to about £300 million of revenue for the group. We were in 19 countries, as I said. Some of them worked really well, some didn't work well, and we shut some down later on, but these were mostly kind of virtual presences. You know, we were still running everything from both London and Paris, but we would have a presence in Poland and even New Zealand and places like that, Ireland. We had 1,400 people employed, a lot of people in production, in the factories, and a lot of people in customer services, but still a huge number in tech and marketing. So we were, at serious scale at that point. To come back to this idea of value and fairness, businesses only work when you figure out what your customers want and you deliver that value to them. You have to figure out what is it they want. In our case, they wanted to be memory keepers of their house, to give a gift that had emotion attached to it, whether it's a Moonpig card or a canvas of a loved one. So we recognize that emotion and that need for us to have perfect execution and to give people good value. And also fairness, in that we recognized that we had to be fair to our customers, treat them as we wanted to be treated ourselves, and our employees as well. With 1,400 people, we had a lot of care of duty and made sure we look after people. And we became much more aware of our responsibility. I remember a period around 2014 where we were taking a serious look at our carbon footprint. We did things like ripping out air conditioning in our factories and putting in passive water-based cooling systems. We completely changed the recycling around the photographic chemistry, switched from what was very cool polypropylene packaging, which of course takes like 500 years to break down, to compostable cardboard packaging, and also just aware of the different groups within our company. I remember, I'm not expressing a political view here, but when the Brexit referendum happened in 2016, the following morning we ended up having a town hall with our staff, an impromptu one, because people were really upset and really confused about what this meant for an international company like us. We used to ship products through the Eurotunnel every day. So we talked to them and said, look, we don't know what this means, but we're going to check it out, and whatever happens, we're going to get through it. But I remember we looked, and in our head office in London, we had 60 different nationalities represented on our payroll. So a very diverse workforce who just wanted to know that we were looking out for them and that we would try and find a way to continue our operations, whatever happened politically. And of course, this constant need for an exit. Our investors were now very, very impatient. It had got to 9 or 10 years since they put their money in, so they were putting pressure on us to achieve some kind of exit. So, exit, first of all, when you exit a company, the company doesn't go anywhere. It stays running. It's still got normally the same employees, the same products, the same website, everything carries on. But the main thing that changes is the investors. You swap out one set of investors for a different set of investors. And sometimes the founders leave during an exit, and sometimes they don't. And our exit came in 2016, and I didn't leave the company, I stayed on. But there are 3 different paths to exit, which applies to all companies. You can do a trade sale, like there's an Apple Beats example. Beats was an independent brand, a much smaller brand, but it ended up selling to Apple. Apple said, you built a cool brand, cool products, we'll buy you. You're still going to continue to operate as Beats, but we now own you. So that's an example of a trade sale. The other one is IPO, which is where you list your company on a public market. So you swap your private investors for a whole bunch of public investors. And for companies, it's if they've reached a certain level of scale, it's a good way to achieve an exit. I personally don't like the idea of an IPO because you have to do everything in public, and the markets tend to take a very short-term view. If you don't keep increasing your revenue and profit every 3 months, you get punished and your share price goes down. A lot of businesses can operate much more healthily if they take a kind of 1 or 2 year view about where they want to get to and can build in private. So then the final option is private equity, where you sell to very big professional investors who are willing to take a 3 to 5 year view of that your company can grow. And that's what we ended up doing. I have to say we tried all 3. We were like for sale for 6 years. So 2010 was the trade sale attempt, which failed. We tried IPO twice, but the market conditions weren't right. And we tried private equity twice, and it finally worked in 2016. So I just want to summarize some of my lowlights along the journey. So first of all, as you've heard, it's a long, for me it was a 17-year journey through Photobox. So running an entrepreneurial business can be slow, can be really hard, can mean lost sleep, can mean becoming poor. It's very stressful, and I'm not the only one who's experienced burnout running my own business. It happens a lot. Code reds, I mentioned them briefly. They were like a constant theme at Photobox. There was always something blowing up or going wrong. I remember in particular, there was one December 2013, I was at a school event in a pub, and I got a bleep on my phone saying the factory in London had gone offline. The comms link had gone down. This was the 5th of December, one of those 3 weeks where we made all our profit in the Photobox brand. And we were probably running at 120% of capacity right then, printing photos, canvases, books, mugs, t-shirts, everything as gifts. And for the factory to go offline, not unusual. So I said to the guys, oh, don't worry, it'll probably come back in an hour. It's probably a BT outage or something. Got home, hour later, still offline. 2 hours later, still offline. I stupidly stayed up all night with my ops team, monitoring the situation. I should have gone to bed and got some sleep. By 6 a.m., I called a war room meeting at our factory. We went there. We tried to get satellite trucks to bring the comms link so we could download people's images to print them. But it was the night that Nelson Mandela had died, and we couldn't get a satellite truck anywhere. All the news organizations were busy. We phoned a friend of somebody who worked for EE, and he said, oh, I've got these new things called 4G routers, so I'll bring one over. So we ended up using some 4G experimental routers. And the main thing was we went out to PC World and bought about 20 hard disks and got couriers to drive between East London, where we had a high capacity downlink, and we were shipping stuff. Anyway, big drama. We were offline for 36 hours. We had to bribe a BT engineer to fix the fibre. What had happened was thieves had gone into the Park Royal area and dug up all the copper cabling and spooled it out, but in the process of stealing the cabling, they cut through the fibres. They cut through our primary and our secondary link. That same week, we had our website go offline due to a submarine dragging its anchor through a cable in the North Sea, and we had an asbestos breakout in our London office. So these things happen. That was a particularly memorable week, but there will be disasters that befall you. I talked about the investors. There's constant pressure from investors. When you take other people's money, you've got to expect the phone calls. And yeah, we're just about to go into a recession, if you haven't heard. And we had 2 of them at Photobox. Can you see the grey stripes on the screen? Yeah. So we had, the first recession was the after effects of the NASDAQ crash. This is the NASDAQ index, by the way. So that period in 2000 when the internet bubble burst caused a global recession, which lasted about a year. And we also had the famous credit crunch recession that we lived through. And they were enormously challenging for us as what was an early stage startup at the beginning and a scaling company in the middle. But they also had their opportunities. So they felt terrible. They felt, oh my God, what are we going to do? Suddenly our business has ground to a halt. Nobody's spending any money. Everybody's panicking, don't know what to do. But the first one, as I said, we went into hibernation mode. And with just a handful of people, we became UK market leader. We had a chance to grow without competitors getting funded or entering our space, without anybody pulling funny stunts. We just had slow growth during a recession, and that actually helped us. In the second one, 2008, we had the time to build my disastrous website without too much competitive pressure, and also we realized that everybody, like now, was feeling very poor after the credit crunch. And they were looking for ways to save money as families, and we were thinking, well, instead of taking a loved one out for a dinner for their birthday, which might cost £50, why not give them a £19 personalised calendar that could be just as emotional and last for a year? So we focused on value and giving people what they wanted to achieve, which is this emotional connection at a low price point. In effect, we were trying to become a kind of IKEA of photo printing, and it really worked. We found a way to produce cheaper, more efficiently, and again, we had a lot less competitive pressure. So I know we're all about to go into a recession, and that's generally a bad thing, but it also can create opportunities for businesses. Just to repeat my personal evolution, which I'm sure some entrepreneurs go through, I came into this business never having managed anybody else. You know, I was 35, but I'd never run a team. I certainly hadn't run my own business. And I realized I had a lot of naivety, some hubris. I'd made a lot of mistakes, and I wasn't managing my health and my stress well. And there was a lot about me personally that needed to change. I started running and swimming and things like that after this burnout. So I think just recognizing my own weaknesses and needing to connect to people to solve those was an important step. Like I said, my health, I wasn't really investing in it, particularly during the very busy years, so fixing those things was transformative for me. I learned to connect to people. I think for the first 2 years of Photobox, I just didn't talk to people. I was kind of head down, trying to get a million things done. And when I finally emerged and started to go out and talk to people about good things and bad things, I felt like I was solving problems much better. And actively learning as well. Firing myself and having a new CEO gave me an enormous learning opportunity to learn from somebody more skilled than me, who knew the ropes and knew how to solve problems, knew how to grow companies, knew how to sell companies, knew how to raise money. And that was like a masterclass. And like I said during that low point for me, to come back to a business and to reevaluate it with fresh eyes, to look at what's wrong. What am I spending my time on every week? Is that helping our company mission or not helping it? That was a really useful lesson. So I left Photobox in 2017, in the spring. It wasn't hard to walk away. It felt like a different company, like in a good way. It had moved on. It was much bigger. My own personal role in that company was much less than it was at the beginning. And it was the right time for me to move on. I did what anybody who sells a business does. I went on a few travel trips with my family. I had some personal projects. I did some fun things. And then I started to get a bit bored after about 6 months. And eventually I went to work for a much smaller SaaS business called Photobox, which was warehouse management software. And it was not that that was like a super interesting problem for me, but this was a business that was in trouble. It had stopped growing, the investors didn't quite know what to do with it, and it was an interesting kind of tidying up exercise, and after 20 months we had fixed some of the main issues that were wrong with that company, and we sold it. And that sale went through just before COVID. So then COVID happened, we were all on Zoom. I had no active work at that time, but one of the things I did was I gave out Calendly links to people where they could book half-hour coaching sessions with me for free. And I'd say, if you're an individual or a company or a team, I don't care, and you want half an hour's advice from somebody who's been through a tough journey, I'm really happy to do it. And I had some amazing conversations. I felt like I learned as much as the people on the other end of the call. And some of those connections were useful to me, and I stayed with them, and I ended up doing work with them or joining their organization or whatever. So just that kind of random connecting really helped me during that period. And since then, I've done a combination of some paid advisory work for scaling companies and some pro bono stuff. So pro bono, it's just, I mean, one of the great luxuries of selling a company is that you get to decide how you want to spend your time. And for me, the things that I like spending time on are organizations that help people who are disadvantaged or experiencing wealth inequality or homelessness, or early on in their career and need advice. I work with one accelerator fund for climate companies, the climate tech companies called Carbon 13. Black Valley is an accelerator of underrepresented founders. I just had actually a meeting with one of the companies I've been mentoring around the corner in Riding House Cafe before this. And one of my personal passions is an organization with a terrible name called Patriotic Millionaires, but it's based on a US organization called that. And we we basically campaign for more progressive taxation for people with high wealth. And I won't bore you with the in-depth story, but one thing I feel strongly about is I'm an entrepreneur and I had a successful outcome from my business. Not everybody does. Entrepreneurship is a risky game, as somebody said, and it's like a process of natural selection, and some businesses work amazingly, some fail, a lot fail. But for the people who succeed, there can be very high returns and high wealth. And it's easy to take that wealth and say, look at me, I'm amazing. My personal creativity and effort and hard work has led to this outcome. But the fact is that I created Photobox and I was able to hire educated, healthy people from the UK workforce. I was able to benefit from customers around the country that had access to broadband and computers and the internet and stable electricity supplies. And I was able to raise money in an economy that was operating fairly and well, with a good legal structure, good fundraising rules, and everybody had trust that the money they'd invest would be handled correctly. And all of those societal elements didn't come for free. This country has invested for decades in providing a stable environment for business, and my business thrived because I built on top of that foundation. And so when I turn around and say, yeah, but look at me, I'm great, I made all this money, I did it because I was benefiting from all that societal investment. And I feel that people like me could afford to put more back into society and enable more people to go to university for free, and more businesses to thrive with support from the government and their friends and family and angels. So I'm just going to summarize now my three main lessons that I feel hopefully are relevant to you in the room. So first of all, I saw that 40% of you want to create an entrepreneurial business in the next 5 years. And that's great. Maybe you've got a great idea and you feel like you've got all the elements ready to start your business, but don't rush it. Many of you that I'm looking at are very young. Maybe you haven't had a lot of industry experience yet. Maybe you haven't built up your savings. There's no rush. You can afford to learn by working for somebody else, get some income, get some savings, get some experience. Like I've met people that say things like, oh, I want to revolutionize the coffee business, and I'm like, oh, have you ever worked in a cafe? No, but it's okay, I've got the theory. So, go and learn, make sure you're ready, make sure you've got the right foundations for your business. Secondly, no business will survive unless it delivers value to its customers. If you don't solve your customers' problems, they won't keep coming back. So make sure you're delivering that value. And personally, I always treated partners, employees with fairness. You've got to leave something on the table for the other person. Don't be ruthless, be fair. And finally, serendipity. Just remember that the role of an entrepreneur is to make connections between things. Embrace those random connections. Embrace those random conversations. Don't be afraid to talk to people about your ideas and your fears. They'll tell you something, they'll give you some feedback, maybe that's going to be useful to you. But make those connections. And now we're going to have some questions. So who's going to do the question asking?
Does anyone have any questions they want to ask in person before we go to Slido?
This lady was first. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, Chair. I actually have two questions. In the beginning of your talk, you said that you tried to convince Mark 4 times. So the first question is, why was it so important to convince Mark? Why didn't you just go and, for example, find someone else? Because I guess having the right business partner is very important. And the other one, you also mentioned that you stayed way too long in small business until 2001-2005. So what is a good period, or how long you should have stayed
in your opinion?
Okay, thanks for those questions. So, I think the main reason why it was essential for me to convince a friend to join me as a co-founder was I was a complete coward, and I just wouldn't have had the guts to do it on my own. And I felt like the things I brought to the table were the kind of passion for the product idea. You know, I was the one that wanted the print service. I was the one thinking, how can I connect with these people? How can I do the hustling? How can I didn't want to build the tech, but I wanted to specify the tech. I wanted to be the product owner, effectively. But I was aware that running a business involves so much more. You know, finance, employees, HR, process. And Mark was a friend of mine. I'd worked with him at UBS, and he was much more of a corporate guy. And I figured he was like a grown-up, a proper mature person, and he would know how to solve all these problems. And he said no 3 times. And then on the 4th time, he eventually said yes, and that was a relief to me. One mistake I made was I gave him 40% of the equity immediately, and after 3 months, he said, I'm not sure this is for me. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? I've given him 40% of the company. There's a trick to that, by the way. If you ever start your company and have co-founders, you have something called reverse vesting, where they don't get all their shares at once. They have to work for a long period of time before they get them all. But I didn't know that trick. But yeah, I was lucky that he joined, because I just wouldn't have had the guts to do it without him. And then, about staying in small business mode, I don't know what we were doing. I don't know why. We had a really good board of, you know, this chairman and the CFO. And I don't quite know why they didn't advise us to go faster. They should have. I think we got stuck in small business mode. You know, we were just printing photos and taking them up to the post office, and every day, you know, like the sales would get a little bit bigger, and we felt there was progress, but somebody should have slapped me around the face and said, this isn't why you started this company, you know, go and change it. And it needed a quantum leap, it needed a kick in the ass, and we were too slow to do it. Okay.
Hello, thank you so much for the talk. My name is Angelica. So you gave us a piece of advice that I don't know if I heard well. You told us that if you enter a market and you cannot compete at the first, second, third position, give up. And I'm like, why? Because there are so many startups that still survive, and I know that it takes so much and many energies, but why telling us to give up?
Yeah, so I think for us, this was about expanding into new countries, and we still had our home markets, which we considered UK and France. And you're right, if you're doing a startup and you start out nowhere and then you get to 10th, it's still worth continuing in your home market. You know that market so well, you know what you're trying to achieve. Hopefully you're trying to be a disruptor where nobody takes any notice of you, and then all of a sudden you overtake people. But when you're trying to launch in new markets and you're not physically present there, it's really difficult. You know, the top 3 get all the oxygen, they get all the attention, they get all the Google links, and if you can't make it and it's not a home market for you, that's when you think, is it worth it? We're losing money in these markets. We don't have a realistic prospect of getting to first, second, or third, so maybe we'll stop. And generally there's a kind of log curve. The first, the biggest company or market leader in any particular market is probably 10 times bigger than the third one, or maybe even 50 times bigger. So there's a big drop-off, and if you're not in those top 3 positions, it's really challenging.
It comes when you do your market research, and if you are sure that it's going to succeed, you give it 100%. But I guess there is a little bit of luck as well for a startup, and things like that, so a lot of luck.
Yeah, you have to have your lucky breaks, and yeah, there were as many good accidents in our growth as well as the bad code red, so yeah, you have to have luck, that's for sure. I'll take one from here. So, who's been upvoted? Okay. How did we come up with the sum of 440 starting money for Photobox? So it was my wife's cousin's boyfriend, the CFO. He said, let's try and raise a minimum of 240,000 and a maximum of 480,000, and it was based on some arbitrary valuation he'd come up for the company and a maximum amount of shares he was willing to give away. And we there was no real science to it, but the scary thing was that we burned through that 480,000 so quickly. So I have no idea what we would have done if we'd raised the minimum of 240. It was an expensive business to start, and we needed every penny. So yeah, it's difficult to say. I think all valuations, particularly of startups, are kind of finger in the air. You have to base it on what other companies that are similar to you have used. It depends on the economic climate, so valuations are now lower than they were a year ago, but no real science to it. What else should we use? What was the main marketing move you made, and would you do it in the marketing aspect if you had to start your company today? So, like I said, we really tried lots of things for marketing, and none of them worked. And our first day's sales were £2.80 from one customer, and the next 2 days were zero. And we started to get a trickle of people coming in, but we were aware that it just wasn't working. We tried taking adverts in digital camera magazines. We get a handful of orders. But the thing that really worked for us was what are sometimes called white label deals. This is where you phone up another company and you say, you sell digital cameras, would you like to offer your own print service to your customers and make money from it? And they say yes. So you say, right, well, we can power that service. We can provide you with a Photobox powered service in your brand that you offer to your customers, and when those customers buy something, we'll give you 30% of the revenue or something like that. And I remember sitting in a Marks and Spencer's car park in 2000, flicking through a digital camera magazine and just phoning the companies that were placing these ads and asking them all that question. And 2 of them said yes. So we launched our first white label deals in the summer of 2000. And for several years, they were bringing us about half of all of our new customers. In fact, the thing that really worked for us was doing white label deals with ISPs, with internet providers in the UK. And I think when we got to about 2003, 8 of the top 10 ISPs were all using our print service but under their brand. And those deals were kind of a pain in the arse. We suddenly had partners that wanted to take us in a different direction or wanted to change this and that, and that wasn't really what we wanted to do, but it worked. It brought us new customers and enough to keep our growth going to the point where we didn't need new investment for a while. So that was the marketing thing that we pulled off that did work. So was your wife employed and earning income during your startup years? No, she wasn't. We had 3 young children, and we did the maths, and she was kind of keen to go back into a marketing job, which is what she did before, but after we paid for childcare, she wouldn't have had much disposable income, and she decided she'd stay at home. And whilst it was completely her decision, and I respected whether she wanted to work or not, it was enormously helpful to me, because those first few years were very distracting, and sometimes I was traveling a lot and working long hours. Every Sunday night I would be watching the website, which used to be the phrase, and I feel like I was a bit disconnected from the family during those first few years, so it's great that she looked after those things and enabled me to focus on work, but it was her choice. Any live questions?
Yeah.
You have to shout. Alex.
So, I'm a child of 80s, early 80s, right? So, not quite the rest of the crowd here. But I have set up my business already. However, the thing which I find interesting to ask you actually, as coming from tech, I am not very technical. Right? So I have very different sort of set of skills, marketing, HR, all this. I'm fully kind of understanding it and sort of finance, etc. But when it comes to digital situation, and obviously in 21st century, everything is about digital, knowledge, right? So the question is, would you actually think that a business that doesn't have someone who is skilled in digital era, will that business actually be possible to be successful eventually? Thank you.
So it is really important to have access to good technologists to build out your vision. But I think it's more important these days to have a good sense of product, of defining what is the problem you're trying to solve for your customers, what is the experience you want to offer them, and being very clear about, in a progressive way, how you get towards building that. But you don't have to be the person that builds it yourself. And I came into Photobox having technical skills, but deciding I wasn't going to code anything, because if I did, I would get completely distracted by that, and I wouldn't be running the company. So, and these days you have a lot more choice about using offshore teams, freelancers, or even, I work with so many startups that are now using no-code or low-code solutions, like Bubble, or, I've forgotten all the names now, but there are probably about half a dozen no-code and low-code platforms where you can build native apps without any coding at all. And so I think it's far more important to have that product vision and be clear about what you want than having to build it yourself, or even hiring a CTO. I mean, they're expensive people, it's difficult to find the right type of person. But if you're clear about what you want, you can always find a solution.
Company and 116. So do you regret leaving your company and like going off all by yourself or something like that?
Yes, it was 2017 I left. We sold the company in 2016. I stayed on another year to kind of retain some corporate memory and sense of purpose for the company. But no, I don't regret it at all. It was a 17-year journey for me. To be honest, I felt like I said, it felt like 4 different companies I'd worked for. The early stage startup, the kind of UK market leader, early expansion into Europe, then dominant European player, and all the M&A stuff. So very different experiences, and with each one, I really enjoyed the learning from it, but I also felt I was getting more and more disconnected from that original ownership of the company. So I was very happy to move on. I was pretty stressed. I think it felt like a marathon, and I was ready to take a break. I mean, there is this thing where you have imposter syndrome, and you think, was I just lucky? Am I going to be able to contribute use to other companies and value to other companies? And so I think a lot of people in my position end up dabbling and going back into other companies and working for them for a while, or advising. And I get a huge amount of enjoyment from doing that advisory work and that pro bono work and helping other organizations to overcome some of their challenges.
So my question is more internal in terms of challenges. So you were talking about how this journey, this cold reds, burden of investors, recessions, right? That's a lot of it are external. Now, in terms of internal, within your early years, how did you motivate yourself to wake up every morning and, get your dream, achieve your goal, and, what did you do to discipline yourself within that?
Yeah, so good question. I think half of it was excitement and half was terror. It was just, I was genuinely excited to build out the business, and I remember one of the things we did at the beginning, I said we only offered like 3 print sizes, and then we started adding more and more products to the site. We added posters, like large format posters, photographic posters, and we didn't have a machine to print those, so I used to load up all the orders onto a zip disk, it's kind of old tech, and I'd walk down the street in Clerkenwell to go to another lab where they could print these things. And I remember walking down on that journey one morning and thinking, will we ever get to 250 quid a day? And it was both troubling and exciting, like we could see this growth. I had an Excel spreadsheet that was like daily registrations, daily orders, revenue, and we were basically kind of monitoring these stats. So part of it was this excitement. This is something I've built. It's small and modest, but it's growing. And then part of it was the terror. Like, I've given up my career for this. My family's hoping it's all going to work. So I don't know. I mean, you know, like I remember for about 6 months I was surviving on 4 or 5 hours sleep a night and just felt like there was so many things to do. But you can't carry on like that. You know, it's another type of burnout. So I got back into more of a normal routine of, you know, being in the office 8 till 6 or something, and then trying to go home and spend some time with the family. But yeah, just a combination of those two. And entrepreneurship feels like you've lost control in some ways, and you have to embrace that. Right? If you want predictability and steady income, don't do that. We've got maybe
Pay off all of your dad's friends.
So 2006, and they were very grumpy. They got 4 times their money, which was not bad. You know, most companies during that era had gone bust and lost money. They got 4 times. For those people that bailed us out with the extra 100 grand, they got 8 times their money. But they did say that was 6 years to wait for a 4x return, and they didn't think that was good value. But yeah, we got rid of all the small investors in 2006, and then we only had professional investors after that. But yeah, I do remember like those phone calls where these guys would say, you know, you do know I'm retired, right? I can't wait forever for this. And so yeah, a lot of pressure.
What were your most common like code red situations? And also when you started, what were your biggest expenses? And would you say now, if you went back with the knowledge you have now, would you be able to reduce those expenses with the knowledge you have?
Did you do one of the Slido questions as well? I think I saw a similar question. Okay, that's good, we can answer that. So what was the first part of your question?
The first part was, what was the most common code red you had?
Oh,
Like situation.
to be honest, the code reds were so unpredictable. It felt every time something happened, it was the first time it had happened. And I think the ones that were repeated, we did fix. You know, we found every time one of those happened, we patched it up so that thing would never happen again, but there was always something else. I think we had a lot of vulnerability at the beginning around, well actually, when we bought the French company, or merged with the French company, that was April 2006, and another holiday disaster, I think in July 2006, I went with my family on holiday in Norway, and we got to the hotel, and again, my phone went off, and the French website had gone down. And they were hosted in an organization called Cult in Paris, and it turned out that this storage array had failed. So it took all the images down, and the website used all that same storage. So it went offline, and it took us 3 days to get any level of service back, and even then, half the customer's images were missing for another 10 days. And, you know, that was, again, there was no redundancy. We thought we had a redundant storage unit. It wasn't. There were all kinds of individual problems, but there was no pattern to them. Everything was a fresh experience. And was your question about how much would it cost now, or what would we do differently now?
When you got the $500,000 in your bank account, why did they drain so quickly? And like, would you be able to change that now with your current one?
Yeah, so 480 grand sounds like a lot of money. We had to spend 140 grand on the print machine. As I said, nobody would lease it to us. We had to spend about 80 grand just on the server rack that you saw for the storage and the servers. We had to spend about, I don't know, 40 grand with an agency to build the first version of the website. We had to put down a deposit on the building. You know, and all of this stuff was just big checks going in all directions. And so the money just disappeared really quickly. Today, I think there are several things different. First of all, the whole ecosystem for technology is much richer. You've got all these cloud services, AWS, you phone up AWS, or apply online to AWS, and they'll give you like $1,000 in credit. You can start running some services, see how it works. It's peanuts to run a website and a processing server or whatever. Storage is very, very cheap now, and I think also the whole business climate around startups is much more friendly. So you'll get banks that are very accepting of the fact that you need credit finance or... so yeah, I think if I was doing exactly the same service today and there wasn't a print service available already, maybe I could do it with 100,000. But yeah, at the time it took 480.
Your talk is very inspiring. My question is, you suggested that we should gain experience in a particular industry and then get into the business entrepreneurship world. So my question is, don't you think a person in the age of 25 starting his own business has a lot more buffer to fail, doesn't have financial responsibility, and can fail again and again and try new things, rather than someone who's at the age of 35 and 40 and has a lot more financial responsibility and not much chance to fail?
Yeah, that's a really good point, which is, doesn't somebody who's 25 have a lot more capacity to fail and try new things than someone who's 35? And for sure, yeah, I mean, but you've still got to pay your rent or, you know, eat, and it depends on your startup, right? If your startup starts out as a side gig and you can work on it in parallel with your studies or with your job, that's great. And you know, there are entrepreneurs in their early 20s and people who drop out of uni to do entrepreneurial stuff. For sure, it's for people it could be the right formula. But I think work out what it is that you need to achieve and how you're going to solve the problems up front. Don't jump in with a blindfold into the abyss. You know, make sure you know what kind of connections you need, what kind of experience you might need. Have you got the people to help you? Have you got the basic experience? I mean, it's hypocritical, right? Because we walked into Kodak and Agfa and told them what we were doing, and they basically laughed us out of the building. They wouldn't even sell us a machine. They thought we were such a joke. Fuji took us seriously, but only because our chairman introduced us to them. So, yeah, we were considered to have no experience and to, you know, not be viable. But yeah, just give. I guess what I'm saying is, there must be some kind of checklist for your own business, and just make sure you've satisfied yourself that you've got the basics to make a good, solid run at it, rather than jumping in too early.
I have a follow-up question to what you just finished. I was just wondering, how did you present your idea to the investors, and what were sort of the key points they were looking for, and especially considering that you might not be as a professional in the industry? And,
so at the time, you know, how did I present the idea to investors as a non-expert in the industry? And like I said, different time, 99, everybody and their cousin was starting a website, and so all we had to do was say, we're starting an online business, and here's my business plan, and people were willing to invest based on that. These days, it's normal to put together a slideshow, a deck of your investment pitch, and I probably see 5 of these a week. I know how to recognize a good deck from a bad deck, and what investors want these days is reassurance. They want reassurance that you can clearly express the business model that you're about to jump into, that you've identified your target market, that you know how you're going to raise the money, how much money you need, where you're going to spend it on. They want to see, most of all, a clear understanding of unit economics, like it costs, you know, 80p to do this, and I can charge the customer £1.20 and blah blah, that kind of thing. They want to see evidence this is a scalable business and not just capped out at a small business level. And they want to see early traction. Early traction means you've tested, you've either built something and you've got some really positive feedback and people are starting to use it, or you've not built it yet, but you've done surveys, you've got some early beta people signed up saying they would be willing to pay X per month to use this when it goes live. You know, those kind of things. And they want to see the credentials of the team. Me personally, I don't do a lot of angel investing these days, but one thing I've learned is single founders are a high risk proposition. I've had angel investments that have gone bad because a single founder gets distracted by a legal issue or an operational issue or funding, and kind of goes offline and the business fails. I've had two founders that have had mental health breakdowns and the business has failed. So, yeah, if you have an opportunity to get together with somebody else that you trust and you feel brings something to the table, then that makes a more investable business.
My name is Danielle, and my question would be, so how did having a business with your friend affected your connection with him? And how long did you work together? And how is your connection now?
So, a very good question. So, my co-founder Mark, I told you it took a lot of nagging for him to join me. He said after 3 months it wasn't for him. So, several things I can say about that. One was we were really different people. And whilst I completely trusted him and respected his abilities, I thought very differently to him. But actually that was a good thing, because all the times I was bouncing around and really up about something, he would be the kind of voice of reason. When I felt something was unsolvable, he would come in with a solution. I remember him telling me more than once I was very immature, so having different personalities really helped. He didn't leave after 3 months. We ended up working together for 12 years. He eventually left. He became managing director of Photobox UK for a few years. And then he left. He was 5 years older than me, so he kind of had aspirations to retire early. And it's weird, whilst I worked with him for so many years and spent so much time with him, probably more than my family, we were never kind of really close. I would very rarely go around to his house, he would very rarely come to mine. But we are good friends, and I see him for lunch maybe every, I don't know, a couple of times a year, and we always have a lot to talk about. But it was just a good dynamic.
I think I speak on behalf of everybody. That was absolutely fantastic and very inspiring. So yeah, thank you. Just a couple of notes before you all leave. We do have food and wine, so please help yourself and network and chat and whatnot. We also have some evaluation forms, so if you haven't filled them out yet, could you please do so and leave them on the chair or leave them on the table just outside. And also, the next What to Take event is the October the 26th, called What to Take to Deal with Loneliness, so hope to see you all there. And finally, if you haven't had a chance yet, please follow Westminster Enterprise Network. We have a range of events coming up this semester. For those of you who have a business idea or are looking to start a business idea, we have 2 programs going at the moment. One is called Startup 101, which is for the students who have a business idea and want to learn about marketing, branding, pricing, how to grow their customer base, how to recognize the gap in the market, and all of that. And the other program is called Freelance Essentials, which is for students who maybe do graphic design or photography or videography, that kind of thing, and want to start a business that way. So yeah, please follow We Network, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.